You're listening to Health Innovators, a podcast and video show about the leaders, influencers, and early adopters who are shaping the future of healthcare. I'm your host, Dr. Roxy Mooney. Hey, Health Innovators, welcome back to the show. On today's episode, we have a special guest. I'm sitting down with Christine E.B. Howard. She is the founder and CEO of EB Consulting. Welcome to the show, Christine.
Hey, thank you for having me.
It is so good to have you here. So today's conversation is going to be all about SBIR. So start off by telling us a little bit about your background and what is EB Consulting and how are you helping the health innovation community?
So our firm, EB Howard Consulting, and my background real quick. I came out of the evaluation field, which is after graduate school, I went and worked at an evaluation firm, which we measure and report on outcomes of grants. So whenever you receive a federal or state grant, there's reporting requirements. Did you do what you said you were going to do? And with the dollars you receive. So independent reporting on outcomes. So from there, in 2013, I had the opportunity to start my own consulting firm, and I did. And I first started out in the evaluation space, and I was having clients come to me and say, hey, you know, you're in the evaluation space. You've been helping write goals and objectives for these proposals. Can you help us write the proposal? I'm like, okay, yeah, we'll write the proposal. And then I eventually had clients who were like, hey, can you help us find other funding? And so that's how we got into the space, is we're helping our clients find and apply and then measure the outcomes on funding. And our specialty, our big focus has always been in the STEM space, in innovation space. So anytime anyone's working on anything that's considered has a high growth potential and it's, you know, highly innovative, we want to work with that type of client. That's our target audience. And SBIR has been our main focus since day one, and we really like working with it. And so SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research. There's also a complementary funding line called STTR, and that's the tech transfer funding element. It's funding that does not take equity from your startup or small business. It's been around since the mid 80s, probably like 83, 84 in that area, with the whole purpose of spurring on innovation in the United States and propelling the US economy. And there's 11 agencies that participate in the funding, and it's all coming from the Small Business Administration. So things like the National Institute of Health, National Science Foundation, DOD. So if you can find one of the 11 agencies, they have an SBIR, STTR line, and they different deadlines throughout the year. NIH, we work a lot with NIH and NSF, a lot with DOD as well. But the whole purpose, they have different stages of funding. So they have one called the phase one, and that is about between $50,000 and $250,000 worth of funding to help demonstrate feasibility or proof of concept. So if you have an idea, you're not sure it's going to work, but you need to hire people, employees to help collect data and evidence that it's going to work, that would be phase one. And then there's a phase two, which is deeper refinement with a focus on commercialization. And that could be $750,000, upwards of $1 million worth of funding. And then there's some agencies have a phase three as well, which is deeper commercialization and taking your product to market, depending on the agency. So yeah, SBIR is meant to spur on technical innovation.
So within those 11, how many of those are available to health innovators?
Well, I would say broadly, potentially all of them. Okay. And here's why. So yeah, everyone thinks NIH. But what I would encourage everyone to do, if you're looking at, let's say the National Science Foundation, you may be doing something with machine learning, or AI or augmented reality. What you would want to do is look at their topic lists, and they're more focused on not necessarily the industry you're in, but what you're doing. And I would say of those 11 agencies that you're looking at, look at their topics, look at the solicitation. You'd be pretty surprised to see like DoD might have a component for a health innovator as well. They're always looking at ways to help improve outcomes for, their employees. I would say don't rule an agency out just because it sounds, maybe DoD or Department of Energy. Don't rule them out. You never know. Their topics may align with what you're trying to achieve, especially with the innovation that you're working with, because there may be other applied uses for not directly in your field, but maybe in other fields as well. And so why not take that opportunity to help propel your innovation? Don't rule them out.
So you have been able to help secure, I think, $65 million in funding. Is that about right?
Yeah, they're a little bit more, but yeah, that's about where we're at. Yep.
And so is how do you do that? What is the expertise and support that you bring to the community to be able to accomplish that? Because I've been, producing this show for about 3 years now, and a good portion of our guests that come on the show are in that early stage startup or emerging startup phase. And a lot of them are still struggling to get funding and pitching investors. Even with all of the money that's being poured into the industry, they're still struggling to get funding for a variety of reasons. What separates what you do, and how are you getting those big numbers for folks?
So some of it is SBIR. So we've had a reasonable amount of success with SBIR, whether it's NSF, NIH, DoD. And we come at it from a very different lens than maybe my colleagues or peers within the industry. We come at it with an approach of, when a client comes in the door, they're the expert, they're the subject matter expert, say it's machine learning or AI or augmented reality or whatever it is, they're the expert. Our expertise is the funding line. We know what the reviewers are looking for. We know what's allowable, not allowable. We understand how to put budgets together. We make sure all the forms are filled out properly. And probably the number one thing, like we see more often than not, like when clients come to us and maybe they've already tried to submit and they weren't successful, just following the instructions alone is enough to get you. Like if you don't follow each and every single component and instruction, you'll get disqualified right away. So things like, fonts and margins and, budget allowables and how you're going to spend your money and, what you're proposing to do, those sort of things, you just following the fundamentals and the instructions of the solicitation and submitting on time, if not early, if you can help it. You get 50% you get that 50% of likelihood out of the way right away. Just follow the instructions. Now it's on writing for clarity and making sure that what you're proposing to do, everyone can understand it, whether or not they're, a subject matter expert in your field or not. The reviewers have to understand what you're trying to accomplish and what your measurable outcomes are going to be. Like, how are you going to demonstrate success? So we don't have to know, the nuts and bolts of machine learning, but we need to know, like, how are you going to measure success? If you're doing iterative development and training, your machine learning, like, how do you know when you're successful? What's the indicator that lets you know when you have to stop and you've reached an outcome that it is going to work? So that is our lens that we're coming from when it comes to like proposal preparation. And like I said, the bulk of our success has been SBIR, but we've done stuff with the EDA. We've had anything else surrounding economic development. We've had a pretty reasonable success rate in that area as well. And then, of course, outside of the federal funding space, pitch competitions, high dollar, we help our clients, prepare for those as well.
So let's talk about some of the numbers. And whatever numbers you want to disclose, like for whatever entity or agency. But what are the numbers? Like, help our community understand what type of money we're really talking about at maybe each one of those phases and how many people actually get funding, like, what that looks like. I mean, are we talking about pennies or are we talking about big dollars?
Well, it depends on what your understanding of big dollars is or your definition of big dollars are. So let's just talk about NIH, because that's where most of your audience is going to sit. So these are not R1 research projects we're talking about. We're talking about smaller dollars. We're talking about somewhere for a phase 1, not a clinical trial. So I want to be very careful about the language. NIH uses clinical trial, phase 1, phase 2, whatever. But SBIR also uses the words phase, and they mean the type of funding you're going for. So a phase 1 SBIR, and you can have human subjects involved if you want, depending on what you're doing. But it's typically going to start at around $250,000. And if you meet certain topic criteria, you can maybe have $400,000 or $500,000 to increase your budget, depending on what you're doing. And you meet certain topic priorities. A phase 2 may also be upwards of 1.5 million. An SBIR phase 2 would be 1.5 million in that area. And maybe room to exceed the budget a little bit more if you meet certain topic priority criteria. So that's the kind of money we're talking about just in the phase 1 and phase 2 in the SBIR, STTR space. We're not talking $5 million grants. And don't get me wrong, we've had experience with those. But if we're just talking about SBIR, roughly $250, 250,000, it's for 6 months of work. 6 to 8 months of work, maybe a year. Mm-hmm. So we're not talking multiple years. We're talking about a very narrow window, a small pool of cash just to demonstrate feasibility or proof of concept. Whereas your phase 2, you could probably do a year to 18 months, maybe even further, depending on your subtopic line that you're working in. So that's, $250,000 in a phase 1 isn't going to go very far if you think about how far your runway has to go.
Yeah.
256, actually, I think the number right now is 256 or 259. I forgot what the exact number, but it's around 250,000. But you're trying to use that money, that pool of money, to pay for people as W-2 employees to do the bulk of the work to demonstrate proof of concept. So if you have to hire developers, or if you have your team already, engineers, maybe you have practitioners or subject matter experts that are on your team to demonstrate that feasibility. And the same thing again with a phase 2, you're doing deeper data collection focused on commercialization. So yeah, that's about the time frame for that. Now, likelihood of success.
Yes.
NIH is incredibly competitive, as probably most of your viewers probably know. The likelihood of getting an SBIR, all your ducks in a row, everything's organized, has to do with your reviewers. You're going to get 3 reviewers, as most of them probably know, and they're going to be your peers, with expertise, and hopefully they understand what they're looking at. Sometimes reviewers do, they don't. But your likelihood of success, depending on your cycle round and your topic and what you're focused on, is very low. And when I'm going to say it's about 7% to about 15%, mm-hmm. That doesn't seem like for someone just trying this out just to see if it works. I wouldn't encourage anyone to go for it if they don't have a team already. They aren't already chasing investors, venture cap and angel investors. I would say going through the proposal preparation process really is about planning out your innovation for the next 6 months to a year. And going through that proposal preparation process should be almost like a strategic planning process. This type of funding shouldn't stop your innovation dead in the water. It's nice to help propel it and get it where it needs to go, but you shouldn't be using SBIR as if we don't get funding, we're not doing it. You should already have, other forms of non-dilutive funding coming in the door and dilutive capital coming in the door. And actually, if you have venture cap and angel investors, getting something like this in place helps de-risk their investment as well. So there's a lot of moving parts to this. I wouldn't do it unless you really, you have a team put together, you already have a revenue potential stream for this in the next 18 months or so. You have a team. Can't stress this enough, a team in place. It's not the time to start shopping for a team. You already should have these people in place. You should already have a really good R&D plan, probably well mapped out. And then if you can we can put all the components together, we can have a really competitive proposal and increase your likelihood of success. I mean, we can, read the instructions and make sure things get done the right way and reduce that likelihood of not getting funded. But it is competitive. I mean, we're transparent about it. It is a competitive environment. We don't want someone chasing it just for the sake of chasing it because they're like, well, this is going to solve all of our financial woes. It's not, it doesn't work that way.
So how many people were given grants last year, ballpark, and how much grant money was dispersed?
Oh, good question. So I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it's upwards of, there's several thousand people receiving grants just in the SBIR space. I know the R&D budget for the U.S. government, specifically when it surrounds innovation, is several $billion. So, it's not a shortage of a budget. It has to do with whether or not you can make a compelling case. Your language is clear. You have a strong proposal going forward. And, there's only so much work we can do in the proposal preparation side. If you haven't thought out your R&D methodology, no amount of like us putting together a compelling team, bio sketches and budget, if your R&D isn't rock solid, it doesn't matter.
So what happens if someone comes to you, they hire you to help them write the grant, but they really have maybe a weak business model. Maybe their value proposition is weak and or unclear. Maybe there's just some fundamental elements of their market.
I talk them out of going for, I'll talk them right away out of going for funding. Yeah. I want them to be our client, of course. Yeah. But typically what I would do is encourage them to get involved in I-Corp. That's like I-Corp, C-O-R-P. Yep. And there's an I-Corp associated with the National Institute of Health, and there's one associated with the National Science Foundation. You can find one affiliated with any major research node area. And get involved because they're going to walk you through the paces of customer discovery, working through your value prop, making sure that, you have, working out what your potential revenue stream is going to be and what it looks like. I encourage anyone to get involved with that and, work that out before you even start chasing grant dollars, because it's not an effective ROI to have us at the table and you don't have a well thought out, value prop. It doesn't help us. And if anything, then the client ends up frustrated because, hey, we didn't get funded. Well, it just, I rather not. I rather be straightforward with it and just say, look, you have to have this thought out and then come to us when you're ready. We can take the paperwork off your plate. We can help writing and editing and lit review and take a lot of things off your plate, but certain things as a business owner, because it is your business, you have to do it. Yeah. And you have to work out those things like your customer discovery and your value prop.
Hey, it's Dr. Roxy here with a quick break from the conversation. Are you trying to figure out what moves you need to make to survive and thrive in the new COVID economy? I want every health innovator to find their most viable and profitable pivot strategy, which is why I created the COVID Proof Your Business Pivot Kit. The Pivot Kit is a step-by-step framework that helps you find your best pivot strategy. It walks you through 6 categories you need to examine for a 360-degree view of your business. I call them the 6 critical pivot lenses. As you make your way through this comprehensive kit, you'll be armed with the tools, tips, and strategies you need to make sure you can pivot with speed without missing out on critical details and opportunities. Learn more at legacy-dna.com/kit. What are your thoughts about, is this a chicken or egg kind of phenomenon? Because there's this, I need funding to be able to do the customer discovery. And from my perspective, customer discovery like doesn't end. It's like for the life of the company, this is what we do. Obviously, there's these milestones that you reach that kind of give you something to work with to be able to move forward in that commercialization plan. But it's like I need funding to be able to build out the business plan, to be able to test the feasibility of these ideas, for me to be able to say that I've got a strong business model in place, but I really have to have that before I get the funding. So like, what's your perspective on this chicken or egg phenomenon?
So, with I-Corps, I go back to I-Corps. So some I-Corps will give you money to help you with customer discovery and pay and going through that process. Some of them will give more than others. It can be anywhere between $5,000 to $20,000. It's a reimbursement grant, so you have to do the work and show your receipts and that sort of thing.
Yep.
So there's that. But when it comes to chasing something like SBIR, it's good to have investors at the table already, even if it's not, maybe it's your friends and family, you've done a friends and family round and you're, getting some people to put some cash in. Maybe you're using your own financial reserves, whatever it is that you have, to get the company up and off the ground. It's your own personal investment into the company. Maybe there's other funding besides SBIR that you're going after. Maybe it's pitch competitions. And I always say, pitch competitions, I always reference 43 North, which is right here in my hometown. It's $1 million grand prize if you win the pitch competition. And for second place, it's $500,000. That can make the difference between making for 20 minutes or an hour of your time. Yeah. Filling out an application online and making sure you have your financials together and spending an hour of your time to enter into a pitch competition. Why not? You should be well-versed at, pitching anyway. If you're going to be chasing down investors, you might as well. But chicken and egg, some of it's going to have to come out of your own pocket to start. And that is the nature of starting up a business. Yeah, you could go take out a loan. I'm not a big fan of taking out loans personally, or using credit debt in any way, shape, or form, but that's my personal thing. But maybe other people are more comfortable doing it. But it's easier to get funding once you have funding coming in. And so you're right. It's like a chicken and egg, but some of it's going to have to be your own personal finances and, getting, friends and family, doing a friends and family round.
Yeah, definitely. So give some clarity on what grant writers like yourself do and what you don't do.
Yeah. Well, let's start out with ethics right away. I like to talk about this because it's probably the number one thing that people ask about, when I'm having a consult call and they say, so do you take a success fee? Do you work on contingency? So any reputable grant writer who's, they don't have to be a member of a professional association. We're a member of the Grant Professional Association and American Evaluation. We're a member of a bunch of them, whatever the associations. But you should be following a code of conduct and code of ethics as a grant professional. And, we say we're fee for service. You can't control the outcome of a funding opportunity. You can't make funders fund an app. If we did, we would be wildly wealthy, because we'd be making everybody fund everything. But we're fee for service. We don't work on contingency. People ask about whether or not, well, can I just pay you out of the grant? Well, no, that is not legal. There's a piece of legislation that says you can't pay for services rendered out of a grant award. So we don't do that. We follow general accounting principles. And I would say, you don't have to work with us, but anyone you choose to work with, they should be upholding, the laws and regulations and not putting their client at risk. Should they ever be audited?
Sure.
Never want to do that dance with the IRS. Those rules haven't been enforced in recent years, but that doesn't mean they won't be in the future. And I'd rather just not. So that scares people a little bit because they typically don't. Sometimes that's an indicator to me that they don't have the money to pay for our services. That's an early indicator right away to me. So when you're ready to pay for services for a grant professional, even if it's not us, expect to be paying anywhere between $4,000 and $10,000 per proposal. Anticipate that, know that, it's their time and their effort and making sure that the paperwork is filled out and making sure things are done the right way. And that, we're up on the latest regulations and what's allowed and not allowed and that sort of thing. So I'd say, so as far as us, as what we do and don't do, of course, we follow the rules. That's the first thing. But we typically work with startups. Rarely do we work with nonprofits. If they're in the economic development space, yes, I'll work with a nonprofit. But typically, I will turn a grassroots organization away, or I have a list of referrals of other grant writers in the space that will work in that space, and that I'm happy to make introductions, but just that's not our jam. We don't work with nonprofits. Yep. Grant writers have specialties. Some of them work in the education space. Some of them work, in the after school space, or, maybe they work for religious organizations. So if you're going to select a grant writer, pick one out that, understands the industry. Ours is SBIR. That's what we do all day long. We don't have to be subject matter experts in machine learning or biomedical technology. We like to have a good comprehension of what's going on, but we're not subject matter experts. We rely on our clients to be the experts in their business, not us. Other things that we will do, we are happy to build a funding menu for a client. It's a separate service, and we will go find every single piece of non-dilutive funding that's out there. Pitch competitions, accelerators, grants, not government grants, you name it, tax incentives, you name it, we'll go find everything. We'll map it out for the next 12 months. Sometimes we can do 2 years out, depending on what's going on in the landscape. So they can make an informed decision, go for things like 43 North or, other things other than SBIR. There's incentives, tax incentives out there, and depending on where they are, they may be able to leverage those. So we can build funding menus for clients, course proposal preparation, everything from full service all the way to maybe someone just needs a critical review. They've already written the proposal, but they need us to look at it and say, did you dot your I's, cross your T's, that sort of thing. We can do that. And then post-award, which is that evaluation element, reporting back to the agency. We can certainly do that as well. So we find it, we apply for it, and we measure it. So those are the 3 things we do in the innovation space.
That's great. I think that is so helpful. I'm surprised by how many health innovators I come across who really have no idea what SBIR is.
Yeah, you'd be surprised what people are like. They just, even though it's a well-marketed program, there's room for better marketing surrounding it. And you'd be surprised how much information is not out there about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So is there anything else that in your experience with working with SBIR or just in this ecosystem, is there anything else that you would want to share with our audience? Is there kind of, we've got later stage companies that are innovators. We've got mid-market companies that are innovating or have brought innovations to market. Is there anything else that you would want to share with the community?
So I would say don't get discouraged with a proposal that gets rejected. There's a variety of reasons why proposals get rejected, and sometimes it has absolutely nothing to do with your innovation at all. It has everything to do with the cycle you went in on or the budget dollars that are left. And know that you can always resubmit your proposal. So if, we've had clients come to us and say, we submitted by ourselves, the reviewers came back, they ripped us apart. How do we resubmit? And we're always willing to work with a client on the resubmission process and give them critique and feedback on what works and what does not. And why did the reviewers say this way, and how to resubmit. A lot of times, the industry expectations, specifically in the SBIR space, you're going to submit, you're probably going to get rejected, but that second time through, that likelihood of success, if you can address all of the reviewers' comments, your likelihood of success shoots up to something like 60%. And you have to be willing to take that rejection on the first round, because sometimes that's hard to hear. No, you weren't funded. And you're like, yeah, we were really hoping to be funded. Well, reviewers, they got their own ideas.
It sounds like our previous conversation about doctorate programs and committee members and chairs.
Yeah. So sometimes I always say, there's no single agency, no single federal agency will prevent you from resubmitting if the solicitation is still open or if it reopens in another format. NIH constantly reissues their solicitation. I think it's something like every 18 months or every so often. So just because it closes doesn't mean it hasn't reappeared someplace else with a different ID number. And I would look for that. The exception to that is DOD. They put out a very unique topic list of what they're looking for, and they're looking for things pretty specific based upon the needs.
Yeah.
So if they're looking for something like autonomous driving vehicles with long life batteries, you're probably never going to see that topic ever again. And you might not be able to resubmit to them. So they would be the exception to the rule, but just because they're so topic driven. But every other agency, if the solicitation reappears, there's no reason you can't resubmit. Make the tweaks, make the modifications, look at what the reviewers had to say. Every single funding opportunity, when you submit a proposal, by law, has to give you the scores and the reviewers' comments. So if you've submitted a proposal to a federal agency and you didn't get the reviewers' comments, ping them, reach out to them, find out what's going on. Maybe it's just delayed because of COVID or whatever, but you're supposed to get your scores and your reviewers' comments back. Use that to build a better proposal, learn from it, grow your company from it, and maybe use that proposal for another proposal in a different agency. Maybe it didn't play well with NIH, but maybe it plays well with NSF. So don't be discouraged just because you got a rejection. Anticipate rejections and learn from them and grow from them.
So you launched, that was extremely helpful. So you launched a platform not too long ago.
Yes, that's right.
Health Innovators. So tell the audience a little bit about that and how they can tap into it.
So COVID happened and all of this funding was coming out for small businesses surrounding COVID, like either to recover from COVID, to stem the tide of COVID, to do R&D on COVID, you name it, COVID funding. And we started keeping track of it in a blog post. And there was so much. There was like 300 opportunities at one point, if not more. I think we had 1,000 in there at the height of everything. And we were just updating this blog post all the time with the latest COVID opportunities. And it was getting to be a bit much. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe we should just make a database. And we've been wanting, because we build all these funding menus and do all this research actively anyway, uniquely for specific clients. Maybe we should take, what we're researching and build a database. And it won't have as much information as a funding menu, but at least it's something that we can keep going back to help with future funding menus and this nice cycle. So we built startupfundhub.com and we made all of the COVID funding free. So you can go in and you can find anything for a small business that's around either stemming the tide, recovery, R&D, anything with COVID. That was in our database right away. We made that free and accessible to everybody. And then everything else that's for small business only, grants, pitch competitions, accelerators, tax incentives, you name it, you can have a subscription access to it. But it has some, the fundamental information, like the name of the funder, the due dates, the award amounts, and the link to the funder. But it's like a fraction of the information that we give in a funding menu. But yeah, it's a subscription database.
You've got 3 levels. You've got the free for COVID. You've got the paid subscription for everything else. And then you've got, like, if you want it personalized menu, then they pay for
you
that.
Could do and that the funding menu is specific to your business, your industry. We reach out to funders. We have conversations with them like, hey, we've got this startup. They're doing this with, VR, medical technology, whatever. What do we need to know? It's more than just like a web scrape or anything like that. It's a deeper dive into making sure, like, as a startup, you need to be able to decide, should I go for that 43 North application?
Yeah.
What are they expecting? Oh, they want me to move to Buffalo, New York if I want a check from them. That's one of the things, like you have to know this. Like, yeah, you could pitch and then you win. And then they're like, by the way, we need you to move to Buffalo. You need to know these things.
Right,
and so we do this deep screening and vetting in the funding menus. So yeah, COVID is free. The COVID database is free to access. You can subscribe monthly or annually in Startup Fund Hub to get access to the funding opportunities for small businesses. Or we can build you a funding menu, which is unique to you and your needs as a business. And you know that everything that's on there is for you. There's not going to be something in there for vascular surgery when you're working on like ankle PT recovery. I don't know, whatever. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining me today. I think it was an invaluable conversation. I know our community is going to get a lot out of this episode. How do folks get a hold of you if they are interested in exploring the platform or your grant writing services? Yeah.
So you see my name right here in the bottom, right there. There's my name. Yeah. If you can find ebhoward.com, you can find me. And that will get you, if you get to ebhoward.com, you'll find our company. It's EB Howard Consulting. There'll be a link in our website right to startupfundhub.com, or you can go straight to startupfundhub.com. But yeah, ebhoward.com. That's us, EB Howard Consulting.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. I know you're busy working to bring your life-changing innovation to market, and I value your time and attention. To get the latest episodes on your mobile device automatically, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate everyone who shared the show with friends and colleagues. See you on the next episode of Health Innovators.